So now we're doing some introductory material. There's still so much to cover about the life of Shah Waliullah rahimahullah ta'ala. So today we're going to do his formal biography. So again, I broke this up. Last week we ended the class by some introductory remarks on biographies, and I'm not going to repeat them, but just keep those in mind. There's no way you can summarize a person's life. That's not our job anyway. But here's a brief biography of this great scholar, Shah Waliullah, rahimahullah ta'ala. So you can divide his life into three phases. Number one is his upbringing and his initiation. So I'll call it initiation. So just here's some facts. So he was born in Shawwal in the year 1114 of the Hijri calendar. That corresponds to 1703. He was born in India, as we all know. So 1703, we spent some time talking about what the world was looking like at that time. He began studying at the age of 5. So he was raised in a noble house. He was in Delhi, which is the main capital of the Muslim Mughal Empire at that time. And his father was a great scholar, Shah Abdul Rahim. So he was a very notable scholar. He collaborated with Aurangzeb in the famous compilation of Fatawa called Fatawa Alamgiriya. So there was about 500 scholars that participated in that effort. So it was basically a massive compilation of Islamic law and Islamic fiqh from mostly the Hanafi school. It's published in multiple volumes in Arabic under Al-Fatawa Al-Hindiya. So in Urdu it's called Fatawa Alamgiriya. So his father was involved in that effort, so it gives you an idea, what kind of background he had. His father had established a great seminary school in Delhi called Rahimiya Seminary. So he began studying very early, at the age of 5. He had memorized Quran by the age of 7, and he began independent studies by the age of 10. So look at these numbers, right? 5, you begin studying. 7, you're done memorizing Quran. And then initial sciences like mathematics and Persian and Arabic and Urdu and everything that they learn. And then by the age of 10, independent studies, that you can start going into studying on your own. And then he completed all the basic Islamic sciences that were available at the age of 15. Okay. At the age of 15, when he finished his formal studies, his father held a huge party in Delhi, invited many of the scholars and nobles. So it was a huge deal that this guy, he was done. Quran, Hadith, and so many things. His father died when he was 17. So you can see, his father was involved in his upbringing. And as soon as he's done, his father passed away at a young age. He was only 17. And so he took over the teaching of the seminary that his father had established. So he began teaching at the age of 17, and he basically taught for 12 years. So that's the first part of his life. So, there's so much you can talk about, but just it's a good glimpse into, how serious he was, how serious his family was, and what he had accomplished at such a young age. Part 2 of his life is called Discovery. So he went for Hajj at the age of 30, right? So basically he decided to go for Hajj. So prior to that he stayed in India, he didn't travel. So this isn't really the time where scholars are traveling all over the world that much. That's the golden age. But so at the age of 30 he went to Hajj, and this is the year 1143 or 1731. And in the Hajj, when he made Hajj at that time, Hajj wasn't like, get on an airplane, 7-day package and you come back, right? So it would be a year, it would be months. It would definitely be months, because it would take you weeks to get there, or months, depending on where you're going from. And then you would stay there for a while. So that was the tradition. And then Hajj was not just about the manasik, but also it was a chance to learn and study, and especially scholars who were serious, they would spend time and studying from local scholars. So in Hajj, basically he discovered Hadith. That was his big thing. So in Hajj, it was a kind of like a discovery of sorts. It kind of opened up many things for him. and he changed his views and his ideas and his way of doing things. It had a profound impact on his life. And he came back, and you could see that in his writings after, he didn't write too much prior to that, but all his writings were after that anyway. So what happened there is hard to tell. You can read many of his books where he mentions some of the things. He mentions series of dreams, for instance, that he had. He mentions some of his teachers. So he's exposed to hadith. That was first thing. So in India, the formal Islamic learning in India, there wasn't a very heavy emphasis on hadith. It never was. So Shah Waliullah, when he came to Mecca and Medina, he found vibrant circles of hadith, and hadith was in a revival. He was also exposed to Shafi'i fiqh and other schools. So in India, what would you be exposed to? I mean, to this day, it's the same thing, right? It's only one way, right? So he was exposed to Shafi'i fiqh. He learned the Muwatta of Imam Malik, and he fell in love with it. So he was exposed to the Muwatta of Imam Malik, and that was his favorite book of hadith. So his favorite teacher there was a man by the name of Abu Tahir al-Kurdi. He was the son of Ibrahim al-Qurani. So he was a very famous teacher. And there were other teachers there, including Muhammad Hayat al-Sindi and others. But this was a famous teacher. And he also discovered the works of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim. And he mentions that himself in some of his autobiographical writings, right? So you can see, so when, just think about his age. He's 30, so he's going there as an adult. Think about what he had accomplished, right? Like his whole, career. He's done with everything. I mean, at that time, most of us were ready to just, sit back and be famous and start giving fatwas. But now he went for Hajj and he learned. It was a discovery. He fell in love with being a student again, and it kind of changed him. So this was his discovery period. So this is where he gained all the ijazat in hadith. He learned Muwatta, Bukhari, Muslim, the 6 books of hadith. He learned Shafi'i fiqh. He delved into so many other fields. And he came back, and you could see that he infused that influence into his third phase, the last phase of his life, which is called revival. And this is his legacy. We talked about Shah Waliullah. To understand him, you have to understand him as a mujaddid, as a revivalist, as a reformer, as someone who wanted to change what he felt was wrong with society and offer solutions based upon his everything that he was learning. And so he brought hadith back to India, and he expanded his school and his teaching. So he basically organized a curriculum in his school, and he established many different places where he was teaching in Delhi and others. So he was focused on producing scholars. That was his main focus, his mission. And he began a career of writing. So he wrote a total of 60 books, over 60 books, 39 in Persian and the rest in Arabic. So the majority were written in Arabic, and a good portion were written in Persian, which was the scholarly language of his time. And then he passed away in Muharram 1176, corresponding to 1763. Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
Tangential question. When did it become status quo amongst the scholars of Islam to start writing a book?
Good question. I'm not sure. It's pretty recent. I mean, because this is 1700, it's not that far back, right? Yeah. So in the Mughal courts, the language was Persian. And their Sanskrit was also used at that time among certain regions. But the predominant language is Persian and Arabic. So it's very interesting. I thought about that too. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's more like the 18th to 20th, 19th century. Okay. Because all the older writings, you go back 100 years or 200 years, they're all in Persian in that region, Farsi. Even the older scholars, they know Persian. Yeah. So scholars from India and Pakistan, if you find anyone who's above 80, they generally know Persian.
My dad knows Persian. He's almost 80.
Yeah. So, but your background is like from Afghanistan, right? Yeah. So that's different, right? That language is alive there anyway. We're talking about in India. Where it's no longer
from pre-partition India.
Okay.
Like Peshawar back then was India.
Okay. So so this is the life of Shah Waliullah. So there's so much to learn and investigate about his life. There's so much research that needs to be done. And we'll look at. I'm going to give you a flow chart where it traces the hadith influences of Shah Waliullah with some of the contemporaries of his time. and you can see the influence of this thought on various contemporary Muslim movements. Okay, yes.
Do we know roughly how long he stayed in Makkah, Medina?
About 2 to 3 years. It wasn't that long, but it was. So it was a quality, not the quantity of the time. It was a good chunk, but it had such a strong influence on him. Yes.
Did you go back, or that was?
No, he made Hajj once, so he came back, and so look at, so he went to Hajj in the year 1731, right? And he passed away 1763. So it's over 20 years, almost 30 years.
So what was Indian scholarship with that hadith? Like, how do you have scholarship with that, the building blocks of knowledge?
I mean, so, okay, let me pause.
The subcontinent.
Yeah, I mean, so, yeah, so history changes back and forth, but like, so we're talking about now at that point in time. So what he did was he infused hadith back, he participated in a revival of hadith. It's because of him, and now they have like the study of hadith in some of these seminaries, but it's still, to this day, it's not very deep. It's still superficial, unfortunately. So, you can have, because from their perspective, you can say that they'll say, you know what we need is fiqh. We need to know what haram and halal is. Our scholars already did the research. Why do we have to go back to the primary sources? This is what we need in a practical terms for our communities. So, yeah, so it's still, to this day, that's how it is. In the traditional Darul Uloom curriculum, there's still very little hadith. So hadith is like the final year. So they do all the 6 books in 1 year. So imagine how much can you, so what it is basically maqra, like reading from beginning to end, very superficial reading.
Doesn't that employ then that age-old tradition of the doors of which they either closed?
Yeah, well, that's what, that's the mindset of most of these seminaries and these schools. So,
but the Mishkat al-Masabid, it's so voluminous even nowadays, though, in terms of what people have, taken and add. Well, they've expanded in terms of it as a text.
mm-hmm.
I mean, they've added in.
Well, there's commentaries.
A lot of commentaries.
Yeah, there are commentaries. And Sheikh Albani, for instance, he did a takhrij of that. So it was published in the English language with his footnotes, which is, it came out in the 80s. So it was a yellow cover, so that was very popular. So
a lot of Indian scholars have even expanded on.
Yeah. So it is a great book, but we're not talking about for common people. We're talking about institutions that produce scholars. Is that enough for deep scholarship, right? So if you just stop there and that's the extent of the hadith knowledge of the institutions that are producing scholars, what does that say about,
But for the lay people, I mean, it should be sufficient.
For lay people, yes.
I mean,
for lay people, all you need is arba'in nawawi, right? Lay people, I mean, even lay people haven't read all the 40 hadith or understood them, so even,
But I mean, for everyday ibadat and things like that.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's excellent. It's sufficient, yes. Just like it's basically the Eastern version of Riyadh al-Salihin. Riyadh al-Salihin is popular in the West, an excellent book, and it's the Eastern version of that. And it's very similar. It's taking, there's abwab, and it starts with the most authentic hadith first, Bukhari and Muslim, then others, and it's a practical guide, right? So it's a great book. But we're talking about curricula, we're talking about scholars, we're talking about producing scholars. And so for that, it's not that. So that was the level of hadith scholarship. So he participated in a revival. It's because of him that hadith was revived. And after him, to this day now, if there's a revival of the tradition of narrating hadith by ijazah, by riwayah. So almost every hadith isnad goes to Shah Waliullah today, because it was kind of died out everywhere else. He was able to revive it. So now, most hadith isnads go to Shah Waliullah.
Wow.
Not all of them, but most of them.
In the subcontinent or in general?
In general, the whole world. Yeah. Because then from him, you had so many greats. I'll show you that chart next week. From him, now, so there's, if you look at hadith learning and scholarship, initially it was in Medina, then it shifted to Kufa, then this was a center, then Egypt was a center at one point, and Damascus was, and then So in his time, it was in Hijaz. That's the Ibrahim al-Qurani circles. From there, you had Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab attended those circles. You had the traditional Uthman Dan Fodio. You had Shokani, not at that time, but some generations later. So, and then after that time, it kind of died out in the Hijaz, and it kind of got revived in India. India was the last major place where hadith was kind of like people traveled to learn hadith, and so
Where's it now?
now we live in a global village. Now there's no regions anymore. Now it's like everything's everywhere, right? So, and now you can never answer that question. Your grandchildren might tell you, and when you meet them in paradise. The history is still being unfolded. Same thing with who's the mujaddid of today's time. You won't know. I won't know. Our grandchildren might know. Right?
But some of the, I don't know, are some of really, all real, are some of the greatest muhaddithin in India, in places like that? I mean, some of the renowned, like Khan.
Yeah.
What's
So
his name, Khan,
yeah. So I mean, so from Shah Waliullah's effort, so after that, this center shifted to India. So there are great traditions of hadith learning in India, and there were great scholars that came, you know. But in terms of like, is it a center? So if you want to learn hadith today, every scholar travels there. I don't think it's like that. You know, there are great individual scholars there as well as all around the world. In Morocco, there were some great hadith scholars. So now I don't think it's not that clear if there's one center today. I don't think there is. And the nature of the world now is so connected. I don't think there's going to be regional centers anymore anyway. What are some?
On that point though, are these people connected really? I tend to think so, that they know who they are in various countries.
No, of course. So hadith scholarship, everyone recognizes like so through the isnad, there already people know their teachers and they know the great. So if you go back generations, everyone knows in this time this was the greatest scholar, and they study their book because everyone reads the same books. So you know, so every hadith work has a famous commentary and a second commentary. So scholars are interacting, they're learning from you, they're writing letters to each other. There's always like been links. You can't be a hadith scholar without interacting with all the major contemporaries, right? So they're great examples of interaction between various scholars, especially in one discipline. Let's close with some golden lessons from his life. So just you can see the importance of family, just a quick summary. Look at how his father raised him, and look at how early he started his knowledge. Also, the idea of learning starts locally. Everyone has, in America especially, this dream of studying overseas and going overseas, and you never go to your local masjid to study with your imam or learn Arabic from your imam, because you will have this dream of going to Syria or going to, you know, the middle of nowhere, that mostly you will never get there. Most people never get there, or some people do. But if you look at any scholar worth his name, there's never been a scholar except that he exhausted his local resources. Like Imam Bukhari, for instance, everyone quotes Bukhari's travels, right? People who love traveling, they say Bukhari traveled. Bukhari, when he traveled, right, he had already memorized all the hadith. So when he traveled and met scholars, he wasn't learning hadith from them. He was quoting the hadith to his teachers, sometimes correcting his teachers. Why? Because he memorized all those books in his own villages, and he learned hadith from every teacher of his land before he traveled, before he set foot outside of his land. Same thing with Shah Waliullah. He spent 30 years of his life absorbing the knowledge, and then when he traveled, then he opened his mind and his horizon. So learning always starts locally. It's never too late to learn. The major formative influence on Shah Waliullah was his Hajj, and he says that again and again, and that's the age of 30, right? So although he started early, you know, we shouldn't despair. You know, if you are older, it's never too late to learn, right? And he learned from everyone. So look at he's a Hanafi scholar initially. He learned from Shafi'is and Hajj. Those were his favorite teachers. His favorite book of hadith was the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So he learned from everyone. And that's great scholars, that's what they do. You look at Bukhari, he learned from Shia narrators. He learned from, you know, all different persuasions. I mean, you have to be careful who you learn from, but you always have to be open-minded and be willing to learn from anyone. And then look at after he went overseas, he came back. So some people go overseas, never come back. So they never come back to serve their communities. That's another thing, right? That's a big problem here in America too. So the scholars, they travel not to make hijrah, but they travel to get resources to come back and benefit their own community, because that's where they're from. That's where they could be most useful. So he came back and he revived hadith in India, and he revived the curricula in India. Also, his style was seeking reform from within. We touched on that compared to some other reformers. So he came back to India, and he didn't come back to destroy. He didn't come back to replace everything with, a different way. You know what? Now we're all going to be Shafi'is, or this is the new way. He came back and he stayed in his home seminary. He used the same curriculum. He just infused that learning, and he tried to open people's minds from within, right? So seeking reform from within is another golden lesson. So these are just some ideas and thoughts from the biography of Shah Waliullah rahimahullah ta'ala. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Any questions? So we won't read. There's no time to read. Inshallah, next week we'll pick up the reading. Inshallah.